Well, my next guest tonight spent more than 3 decades in public service, starting in 1975, when he was elected a Westchester County legislator. 7 years later, he headed to Albany to begin his career in the Assembly, where he quickly gained a reputation for having a sharp tongue and strong opinions. Chief among his legislative accomplishments is the passage of a public authorities reform bill in 2009. This year, he launched a campaign for statewide office in the very crowded race for Attorney General. He lost that 5-way Democratic primary to Eric Schneiderman, who won the general election in November. And so now Richard Brodsky is preparing to leave the public sector. But before he goes, he's been kind enough to join us to reflect on his storied career. Assemblyman Brodsky is joining us tonight from New York City. Thank you very much for your time, Assemblyman.
It's nice to be back, Liz.
So you actually get to go out on a high note, as it turns out, because today we see that the state comptroller has rejected a $118 million contract from a firm that is involved in a scandal that's going on down in New York City, but would not have been able to do this had it not been for that public authorities reform bill that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, well, the Public Authorities Reform Act was and is the largest reform of state government in decades. We took a look at state authorities. You may recall the phrase Soviet-style bureaucracies.
Just briefly.
In the end, we were able to get through both houses and have the governor sign an overwhelming reform of the daily operations, the policies, the practices, and the laws that govern 700 public authorities, the MTA, the Thruway Authority, LIPA. And the point of it is that what happened today with the controller rejecting the contract is the system working. This is real reform. This is exactly what we intended from the get-go, and I'm pleased to see it's actually happening.
Does it make you feel bittersweet at all? I mean, you fought very, very hard for this, and now you're seeing it actually come to fruition and work the way it's supposed to, and you're headed out the door.
Well, I wouldn't say it makes me feel bittersweet. I'm looking forward to January 1st. There's lots of other things to do. Getting this done, which I say with all undue modesty, was one of many things I think the legislature accomplished that I was part of. It's great. It's the way the system should work. I think the legislature does a much better job than people generally give it credit for. This is an example of that.
I want to talk about that actually, because you are one of the few people who actually says that the legislature really is not as bad as the reputation that it has among so many people in New York. But before we get there, I do want to talk briefly about, speaking of Soviet-style bureaucracy, you just came back from Russia, and you were at a pretty unusual conference. How did you end up getting there?
I got invited by the Russian government.
Okay.
My anti-Nazi credentials are pretty good. I suspect it's because I went to Bitburg in Germany when Reagan visited the grave of SS soldiers. And it was a fascinating deal. I was able to use the phrase Albany-style bureaucracies in Moscow, something I never thought I would have been able to do before. But it was about 250 people from all over the world. There is a resurgence of not just soccer violence, hooliganism, but genuine anti-Semitic, Nazi-style organizations and outbreaks across the world. And listening to the various people discuss it was interesting. Whether the Russians had their own political agenda is an interesting question, and I think they probably did. But in the end, I think it was useful to assemble, figure out what was going on, and try to make people aware that vigilance now saves lots of problems later.
Do you think that's something that you're going to be doing more of? I know that sometimes when elected officials get out of public office, they do a lot of sort of liaison work with other countries and other governments.
Well, I'm going to do lots of interesting things. I'll probably end up doing some academic things, maybe some journalism things, some business things, some political stuff. We'll make an announcement about that as time goes by, but I'm looking forward to it. It's an extraordinary opportunity to serve in the state legislature. Lots of good things, important things happened. It will be interesting to see how the next 6 or 8 months go, but I'm pleased to have had my opportunity to do what I did, and I think it was generally done pretty well.
Will you run again for anything?
What do you have in mind, Liz?
I'm not pitching you on anything. I'm just curious if you might be running.
I'm not saying yes or no to anything right now.
Okay.
I'm keeping my eyes and ears open, and what events and opportunities come, we'll see as time goes by.
What about a job with the Cuomo administration?
Oh, I'm not putting my name in the hat for anything, and they have plenty of talent in the state to choose from. It's going to be a real challenge for the governor-elect to balance the needs of people who need government services with the political climate that says cut services. He's going to get whatever assistance and help I can provide, but I'm sure he has his own plans and his own way of doing things, and I wish him all the luck in the world.
Well, now that the Senate is actually officially under GOP control, there's going to be a lot of attention turned to your House, the House that you're about to depart, and the relationship between the Speaker, Sheldon Silver, and the Governor-elect, Andrew Cuomo. What are you foreseeing, and do you believe that it will be as tense as some people think it will?
I think it'll be highly professional. I think the interests of the legislature will be protected by the Assembly and the Speaker. The Assembly will speak out for the needs of the people as it understands it. Sometimes they'll agree with the governor, sometimes they won't. The trick will be how those disputes and conflicts are resolved, but I don't expect to see a legislature that's going out of its way to obstruct the governor-elect, nor do I expect a legislature that's going to roll over and die. This is America. This is democracy. This is checks and balances. This is the different branches of governments competing and in conflict with each other. It's the nature of the system we have. It's a good system, and it's going to work.
Well, but yesterday, interestingly, though, we saw the Court of Appeals heed the governor-elect's call and rule very quickly on that final Senate race that really decided the balance of power in the chamber. And, you know, there were some who asked, well, is that, in fact, a demonstration of the true independence between Branch 1 and Branch 2?
I think you're reaching here, Liz. I think you're really reaching here. There's no evidence that the Court of Appeals took the governor's suggestion. The Court of Appeals did what the Court of Appeals think it should. It's very appropriate for the governor-elect to speak out on any issue he wants to speak out on, but the Court of Appeals, I'm sure, did what it thought the judicial system needed in order to function appropriately. Let's not manufacture either conflict or subservience until we have real evidence that that's what's happened.
Okay, but there will be conflict between the Assembly Democrats and the governor-elect just because they don't have the same ideology. The tax cap is a perfect example. Plus, you have unions who are going to come to the Assembly Democrats and ask for protection, as they always have, and there's not a lot of people left to provide that protection to them.
Well, I'm not so sure this is about protecting unions from the governor any more than it's about protecting unions from the policies and politics of the state. It's about what people think is the right thing to do. Lots of us think tax caps don't make sense. Governor-elect was elected on a platform that says no. The people supported that. In any democracy, that has to be factored in to the debate about what will happen, and there's going to be a negotiation. We do pretty well in these negotiations. I'm not of the view that the Assembly is going to try to obstruct the governor, but I'm not of the view that they're going to roll over and die. So you're going to see conflict, you're going to see argument, but you're going to see in the end people doing what they think best for the people of the state.
Do you believe that the Assembly has the wherewithal to make the kind of deep, painful cuts that Governor-elect Cuomo says are needed?
Well, I think they have the wherewithal to make deep and painful cuts, whether they are the exact cuts the governor suggests or some other element of them, or whether they can be mitigated. That's to be seen. Look, I think one of the key issues here will be the continuation of the income tax surcharge, which is already in place, which is expiring, but which will make it easier to provide school aid and hospital aid. We're no longer talking slogans. The time for slogans is past. If you want to cut spending, and the people of the state want spending cut, then I think the legislature and the governor are going to do that. But there are going to be real human consequences to that. And when the choices arise, I think you may see a modification of conventional wisdom in the press and in the political class.
Okay, but let's be clear. What you're talking about is what's sort of known as the millionaire's tax, right? That the income tax surcharge is what you're discussing.
That's right.
Set to a sunset at the end of 2011. Already, you've seen Andrew Cuomo say no new taxes. Is that not a new tax?
You know, that's parsing words. I think that will be something that develops over time. It's not a conflict we need to engage in now. It's a conflict that will come in its own good time. But when the people of the state understand the consequence to the way they live their lives of solving this problem merely by reducing public services, I think there'll be an adjustment of public attitudes. And as in any democracy, with any luck, there'll be a compromise. And compromise is what makes the system function. You look at what's going on in Washington where they don't compromise.
Well, they have actually. They have been compromising quite a bit.
Only in the last couple of weeks. We went through a year where the Senate Republicans, by virtue of their discipline, were able to turn the Senate from a majority body, where the majority rules, to a body where you needed 60 votes.
True.
That process had, I think, political limitations. I think they've learned that, and now that compromise process is coming forward.
You ran actually twice for State Attorney General. The first time you, because of health reasons, weren't able to get all the way through for yourself and also your daughter. And
Right.
she's okay now, we should say.
She's
right?
great. She just got back from Italy, where she spent some time in Florence, and she got straight up to the airport for 3 days because in Florence they had the biggest snowstorm in 25 years. Just our luck.
Right. And then, so I'm just curious what you think, how you think Eric Schneiderman, who won that general election, how you think he's doing so far?
Well, I don't think he's done so far. I don't think the governor-elect has done so far.
Right.
I don't think anyone who's not in office has done. But I'm sure they'll both be hardworking, successful, and thoughtful people in office, and I think that's all you can ask at this stage in the game.
Well, Richard Brodsky, I want to thank you very much for being with us. I'm sure that we're going to see you again,
my pleasure.
but we're going to also miss you at the Capitol. I am going to miss you at the Capitol.
Well, now you tell me. After years of keeping that a secret. Thanks for the time on camera, Lynn. I enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure. Be well.